Hi everybody, and welcome back to Sew Along with Jan. And today this will be the third video of the February Kimberbell Mini Quilt. And so this is going to be the assembly video, and we got all of our little blocks done in the first two videos. And so I'm very anxious to get this one put together. I'm going to first show you some of the things that we'll need to do this, to put it together. I'm also going to add something to the back. I'm going to put a little sleeve on the back of the mini quilt so that I can hang it in my little hanger. I have one of those little 12-inch Ackfeld scroll hangers that I'm going to hang my quilt on. And so we're going to put a little sleeve on the back of the mini quilt before we bind it so that we can hang it up with that. Okay, so what we're going to do is let's talk about the fabrics and stuff that we need. Of course, we need our blocks. So here's my two birdies and my hearts, and then my word love. So those are the blocks we need to put it together. So we'll sew those together in a minute. We're also going to need the binding, and it called for 2.5-inch binding, I believe, but I like 2.25-inch binding. So I cut my binding. I'm going to go back and look at the cutting instructions here because I can't remember. I'm pretty sure that's what it said though. Yes, 2.5. So my binding is 2.25, and I had 3 widths of a fat quarter. The last video with the assembly, I had some yardage. So this is 3 widths, like 22 inches or whatever it is of a fat quarter. And then I've sewn them together with the diagonal right here. Okay, I've sewed them together diagonally. I'll pull this open so you can see it. Like that. And then I have folded them in half with the raw edges together. So that is my binding. And so that is a 2.25-inch binding instead of 2.5. Whichever size works for you. If you like 2.5-inch better, do 2.5-inch. I'm going to do 2.25. Okay. Then we're going to need a piece of Heat and Bond Ultra. And this is what's going to hold our little sleeve down in the back. And so Heat and Bond Ultra Hold is the type of Heat and Bond that is a permanent bond. So I have a piece here. I'll trim it down. It's about 12 inches long and then maybe 3/4 of an inch wide, 1/2 inch, 3/4 would be fine. Okay, so we're just going to put this on the bottom of our little sleeve to hold it to the back of the quilt. So I got that. And let's see, and then we need the sleeve. So this is the sleeve fabric. And I cut that out of my backing fabric, and the sleeve, I explained this in the last video too about the assembly. I made my sleeve, I cut it 12 inches by 6 inches. And then what I did is I measured on one edge in 1/2 inch from each end, and then I laid my ruler on it, and then I cut it off in a diagonal on the line. And you can kind of see that it's not straight along there. So it makes this top edge 11 inches. So I took a 1/2 inch, marked it with my pen, and then just cut it off from the corner down here to the 1/2 inch mark and made one end 11 inches. So then I'm going to turn this in about 1/2 inch twice on each side. And I just press this in, and then we're going to stitch this down like this and just hem the ends. And then it will be folded up like this. And that way it kind of takes some of the bulk out, because you can see that when the seams come together at the top, when you hem it, they kind of lay inside of each other, and it won't be so bulky at the top. This edge here, the raw edge, will be up in the binding. Okay, so that is the sleeve. And we're going to make one of these on each one of these little quilts so that I can hang it up in my little holder. All right, and then we need the backing. And the backing is 14 inches by 14 inches. I got something all over it. And I have put shape flex on the back. And the reason being, it stays nice and flat then when I go to stitch in the ditch and stitch through these little blocks to hold the backing to the front. And I like that better than just the plain fabric, because the fabric wants to pucker. And you can see the stitches so much more, because the fabric puckers really badly. So I have put a piece of shape flex on the back of my backing fabric, and it is 14 inches square. All right, so the first step then for the assembly here, that's the stuff we need. We get our blocks here. I have some white, just some white Pima cotton thread in my needle and my bobbin. We're just going to do some sewing, and we're going to be using Q02 for the piecing stitch because we're going to be making a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm on my Q tab right now. It says Q01. I'm going to go to Q02, and what that does is that is the piecing stitch on most of the Brother Baby Lock machines. And it has moved now my needle over towards the right so that I can run my fabric right along the right edge of my J foot. And that was what the machine tells me that I have to have on for a foot. Okay, so we're going to look at our book here. And we're going to have to do a little pressing and stuff. So we'll do a few, we'll sew a few things together and then we'll do some pressing. So let's see here. We need to sew the L and the heart together first. So here's the L and the heart. So I'm going to put those right sides together. Now remember, this is going to have a little batting in it because remember those were those special trimming ones. So when we go to press these, it might be just a little harder to press because it's going to have a little extra bulk. But we're still going to do a 1/4 inch seam. That's what it says. Let's see. Yeah, using a 1/4 inch seam. Read my directions. And this is on page, the directions for the assembly are on page 22. All right, so we're going to tie off here, and I'm going to sew these 2 blocks together with my 1/4 inch seam. Tie off on both ends. I'm just using the, I'm not using the reverse tie off. I'm using the polka dot button. I don't know if you can, probably can't quite see it on the camera. I'll put my camera up just a little bit, the polka dot button. Using that to tie off because I don't like to go backwards. It kind of gets off a little bit. When you reverse the feed dogs, they kind of veer off a little bit. So there is L. So that's going to be the O is the heart. Okay. And then let's go ahead and sew these 2 together. Then we can press and then we'll sew all 4 of them together. So then we're going to do V and E for the second row. Get these lined up here. Sew these 2 together. Pin in there to hold it a little bit. These are so fun. I'm so glad I decided to do these. I thought they would be fun for me to do because I just wanted something for my little frame. My frame set's empty a lot. I don't have that many. I had a couple little Janine Babish maybe little signs to put in there, but not too many. And I like this little frame, so it's in my living room. So this will be nice. Then now I'll have one for every month. Okay, so there's our V and our E. So I'm going to get up now and I'm going to go ahead and press these seams open on the back, okay? And then be aware, now none of these have any vinyl, but remember that there is a little bit of vinyl on our blocks and you want to be careful not to touch that with your iron. So I'm going to go ahead and move and press these open, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next row. All right, so we got these done, and now we're going to put, whoops, I guess we better spell love right, huh? Better put this up here. So then our little striped ones and the white ones are going to be diagonal from each other. We're going to sew these 2 rows together. See, and then when we go to do this, I want to make sure that my seam is nicely lined up. So I'm just going to check to make sure I've got it lined up well. And I'm going to put a couple of pins in there. Now remember, this is just a little bit thicker because of the, the way we had to trim these. So they did lay pretty flat though when I pressed them. So I'm just going to pin these together. Hopefully you can see okay. I'm still struggling with my camera mount, so I think I might have to order a new one. I was thinking about that last night. After I videoed all day, I'm going to need a new camera mount, I think. Okay. So we're going to get these all lined up, and we're going to still do our 1/4 inch seam using Q02. And then we're going to put the little bird, oh, it's the little boy bird. We're going to put the little boy bird on the bottom of these 4. Now these are my magic pins. And they're very, very, very thin. So I'm going to very slowly go over these. This is the only pins I would ever tell you to sew over. They are so soft and so thin. I do sew over them when I'm trying to keep things lined up. I have a trouble with little seams like that. So these are magic pins, and they're extra fine patchwork. So they're very, very, very soft. All right, so there is our seam, and then we're going to open this up. See how we did. Ooh, that looks pretty good. So there's love, and then we're going to put the little boy bird on the bottom of this, and then I'll press all of the seams open. So I'm going to go down here. We'll put him on. The seam is already pressed down, so that's okay. So he's going to go this way. Yeah. So we'll put him on this way. Get it all lined up. And I'm going to put some pins again in that seam that I have opened so that it will stay nice and flat for me. And then we will sew the seam together. All right. Again, I've got my Q02. All right. Now these I'll probably pull out because all it's doing is just holding them flat. Just going to get it started here. And I'll pull these out. Hopefully my little seams stay flat for me. Go over to the other side and tie off. Again, I'm just using my white Pima cotton thread to sew this together. All right. Let's do that. And then we're going to sew together these blocks. So that looks good. So then we'll have to do some pressing yet, but I'm going to press all the seams open. There's the first row. And then the second row is just going to be these two blocks. So we're going to put the little girl birdie. She's going to be facing her fella, and then the rest of her little hearts up here. So we're going to line these up. This one doesn't have as many blocks to sew together, did it? It's kind of nice. January's had a lot of little blocks. It was very cute though. I like it. It's hanging in my little hanger now. So, all right. So we're going to get this lined up. Drop the needle. And I try to talk about good sewing practices also when we're sewing. So one of the things I do is, you notice that I always drop my needle down before I start sewing. And I had a grandmother that taught me to sew on a treadle sewing machine. So you had to drop your needle down, or the machine would unthread every single time. And it's actually a good practice for any machine, because the needles do unthread. If you just start sewing and drop your needle down, you often unthread your needle. So I do always put my needle down in the fabric. You want it in the fabric. Okay, so there's our second row. And here's the first one. So I have to go do some pressing, and then we're going to sew them together. Aren't they going to be cute? This is really going to be cute. I like the colors. So I'll be right back after I do my pressing. Okay, so there are our two rows, and now we're ready to put our rows together. This is going to be, I just love the colors. Aren't they happy and pretty? It's going to be so pretty. All right, so let's get these pinned together. Make sure our seams line up nicely here. When you have to open your seams, it's a little harder sometimes to get them to line up nice. So I always pin them when I have to do that, but they're so bulky that it's just too hard to turn them to one side like we would if we were doing standard piecing. All right, so here's another one. I'm going to put some pins in. This one. I think, oh, there's not one on that side, just this side. Okay. I think I'll put a pin in the middle though. All right. So now we're going to stitch these together with the 1/4 inch seam. And then we will be ready to put the back on. Doesn't take too long to put these together. I'm just doing a couple, whoops, sorry, I kind of gunned that, didn't I? My foot controller keeps moving away from me, and then I touch it just with my toe, so it's very hard for me to get, there we go, reach it. Okay, normally don't sew quite that fast. I do sew fast, but not quite that fast. Okay, we're going to pull these out. Still doing my 1/4 inch seam. Let's make sure we're straight over here. Now these I think I'll leave in. I'm just going to very slowly go over these. Try not to gun it this time. There we go. Okay. Because those seams, I really want them to line up. I always have trouble with scooching if I take the pins out. So when I'm really got something I need to have it lined up, I leave them in. Okay. So now we can speed up a little bit and we'll tie off at the end down here. All right. I'll have to do a little more pressing again. Take our pins out up here. I do throw away a lot of pins because when I drive over them, they kind of bend. They're so soft. So, all right. Oh my gosh, there it is. Now, when you're pressing this one, remember there's some vinyls in the leather. Be careful not to get the iron directly on it because it will melt it. So I'm mostly working from the back, so it'll be fine. So I'm going to go open this up, and then we'll be ready to put the backing on. I'm going to do a little pin basting. All right, so it's all pressed and nice and flat. Looks so nice. Look at the little birds. I love the colors. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to flip. This is right side up, and then we're going to flip our backing face down on the table here. And this is the shape flex that you're seeing. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of center this on that 14 by 14. So this is only about 12 by 12. So you'll have a little bit all the way around, which is nice. And then I'm going to pin baste this with my basting pins, my safety pins. So I won't do this all, but I like to pin baste it just to hold it together. At least put a couple pins in each block. And we'll do this. I'm going to I'll just show you a couple and then I'll go over and do it on my table because it's a little easier to keep the backing flat over there. But I just wanted you to see what I was going to do. So I'll put at least a couple of pins in each block just to hold everything together while we're doing the stitching in the ditch. So that's the next step. We're going to stitch down through these blocks to hold the backing on. And then we'll be ready to put binding on and the little sleeve on the back. So I'll be back in a minute. I'm just going to go ahead and put my pins in. I might put another one like in this one, just to kind of hold it together. Don't pin through, like your little creatures, your little birds. But it's nice to hold it together, and it keeps it flat and it doesn't move when we're working on it to do the stitching in the ditch. Okay, so I've got my little top all pin basted here, and I tried to pin baste so that the pins, I could do my sewing without having to take the pins out, and we'll take them out when we're done. And I've also switched over to my Metler Transfill monofilament thread because I usually do the stitching in the ditch with a monofilament because then it isn't quite so noticeable. So we have, let's see, I think I'm going to start, doesn't really matter with these, they're so small. I think I'm actually going to start over here just because I have one little short row to do, and then I'll actually have two. I have these two little short ones. Maybe not. Maybe we'll start in the center. I think I'm going to start in the center. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back then to Q01, which was my center needle position. And I just use my J foot for this. You can also use a walking foot if that works better for you. I like this because it has the little notch in the center of the foot right here so that I can concentrate and keep my needle going down, right down the ditch or the seam line. So that works better for me. And normally when you do this kind of quilting, you would start kind of in the center and work out. So I think that's what we'll do. We'll do this line and then the middle line, and then we'll go back and do these little ones up here. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle. I'm going to tie off. I might take another stitch in and tie off again. See, I think I'm still threaded. I have a hard time with monofilament seeing it. I think I'm okay. All right. So then we're just going to drive right down the seam. And I like to put that little notch. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do one other thing. I forgot to do that before I started. I like to make my length just a little bit longer to 3.0. Just lengthen it out. It's pretty thick. You know, we're driving through quite a few thicknesses, and it makes it sew just a little bit easier. So that's what I'm going to do. Instead of 2.5, I went up to 3.0. All right. So let's go. I'm just going to drive right down that seam. Now, when you wind a bobbin of monofilament, and that is fine because it's also in the bobbin. This is the Transfill, Metler Transfill monofilament. Only wind about a quarter of a bobbin. Don't overwind it, and then wind it slowly because you can actually turn down how fast your bobbin winder works. So I always wind it slowly, and I only wind maybe a quarter of a bobbin or so. All right, so we're going to tie this off. Got down to this end. There we go. So I don't have very much bobbin thread in there at a time. I have to wind bobbins quite often when I'm using monofilament. But what happens is if you put too much on there, it kind of splays the bobbin. It makes it kind of poke out in the center. So just don't put too much in there. Okay, so there's our first line. So we're going to go back and do this line here. Sure, I still got thread in there. Yep. It's hard to see, isn't it? So then we're going to go ahead and start on the edge here. I'm going to drop my needle again. I'm going to tie off. I'm going to take another stitch or two in and tie off just so that it keeps it kind of, there we go. And then I'm going to drive down this seam. And I'm using that little notch in the middle of my J-foot to help me see where my needle is going to be dropping. And if it works better for you to use a walking foot, use the walking foot. Sometimes some people like open toe feet. That one helps too. So there is a mark in the middle on some of the walking or the open toe feet, so that might work for you. If you have trouble seeing through this little plastic thing on here, but I'm so used to this foot, that's the one that works the best for me. All right, let's see here. Go all the way to the other end, and then I'm going to tie off and cut, and I think we did pretty well on that one. So there are the first two stitches, and then when you turn this over, since we use the shape flex on the backing, see how nice that is, because then it's laying nice and flat. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over, and now we need to do these two little lines here and right here. So we're going to do those as well. So go back up here at the top, get that lined up, drop my needle. Ooh, I think it might have unthreaded here. No, maybe not. I have a real hard time with monofilament. Can't see it. Okay, let's try that again. I think it's okay. All right, so let's go down here, go down this little ditch. And we're going to stitch all the way around. Just be careful of your pins. We're going to stitch all the way around the little quilt too, so that the edges are all secured before we go to do binding. All right, so then we're going to stop when we get down to the little boy bird here. There we go. I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to tie off. So we're just going to sew to that block. Okay, and then I'll cut there. And we'll turn over and we'll go this way. Let's see, where'd my thread go? Here it is. And then we'll sew all the way around. And you can either do that with the monofilament, or you can do that with just like white thread. It doesn't matter. See how much thread I have left on my bobbin. I might put the white back in to go around the outside edge. There's not too much thread on there, but I figured that'd be enough to get me through this part. Okay. When you're straight stitching, it doesn't really take that much bobbin thread, so. All right, so we're going to get down here to where the little heart block is, and then we're going to tie off there. But the monofilament works very well for stitching in the ditch because then you don't see the thread. Now this one we probably would have been safe just to use regular white thread. But I always use monofilament. It doesn't show as much, and it doesn't even really show on the back that much. You can see where I stitched, but it doesn't really show. The thread doesn't, so I like that. Okay, so there is the stitching in the ditch. Let me see how much thread I've got in there. I think I've got enough to get all the way around. So now we're going to go ahead and go around the outside edge just to hold this down. And I like to use about 1/8 of an inch. And so there's another notch on this foot. There's one in the middle, and there's one over towards the right-hand side of the little zigzag. And I like to put the edge on that right-hand one because that gives me about 1/8 of an inch. So I use that for top stitching too when I need to top stitch things. So we're just going to kind of do a top stitch so that we don't want it to show in our binding, but we just need to sew the backing to the quilt edge. So then everything's kind of sewn together. So I'm just going about 1/8 of an inch all the way around here. So here I've got a little hair that might get in the way. There we go. So about 1/8 of an inch. Just be careful of your pins when you get around to them. I try to be careful not to pin too close to where I'm going to be sewing because then I can leave the pins in. Okay, so we'll turn. Give me a second here. There we go. All right, that looks pretty good. So keep going along the edge here. And then we'll get ready for our binding and our little sleeve on the back. These have been really fun. I'm so glad I decided to do these. When I first saw them, I thought, oh, I probably won't do those this year. And then I started seeing people making them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, those are so cute. And they were just, I didn't know how big they were. I thought they were bigger. And so when I started looking at the instructions, I kind of got the instructions out and started looking at the instructions, and they were 12 inches, and they were just perfect for my frame. And I really wanted some little quilts to hang in my frame. So these are going to be perfect. Then I'll have one for every month. All right, so we're getting around here. Got one more side to do. Haven't ran out of bobbin thread yet, so I must be okay. Looks like it's still sewing anyway. Oh, guess what? Nope, maybe not. Oh, it hit my little... When it does that, if you ever have that happen occasionally, I sew with my embroidery unit on all the time. See the little flipper over here? The little quilt kind of went up inside there, and it kind of makes the machine mad. So it might do something like that. All right, but it's still sewing, so that's good. Okay, so let's go around this. This is our last side. Around the side here. And then we'll be ready to do the binding. And I think every month I'll just do the binding. I mean, I have to bind it anyway, right? I might as well just leave the camera on. So I wasn't going to do a full binding video, but you know what? We'll just do the binding together. How about that? There we go. So there we have it stitched around the outside edge. We stitched in the ditch. And now I'm ready to trim. So I'm going to trim. Oh, sorry, I knocked the camera. I'm going to trim along here with my ruler. Make sure you keep it nice and straight. And I'm going to trim this backing, this extra backing off. And then we'll be ready to put the little sleeve on the back and also put the binding on. All right, so I got my little quilt trimmed here, ready for the binding. And then I have prepared my sleeve. So this was the sleeve that we trimmed. I'm going to open this up again so we can review it. And I trimmed it. It was originally 12 by 6, and then I marked 1/2 inch from each end of one side, and then I trimmed it off so that this end was 11 inches and this end was 12. And then I hemmed it about a half an inch. I turned it over a half an inch and over a half an inch on both sides. And then I went ahead and did the hemming on it. And then I went ahead and folded it in half and had the raw edges meet. Okay. This piece here is my Heat and Bond Ultra, and I adhered it to the narrower side. So you can see this is the narrower side here. So when I folded it in half, that's the part that's going to be against the quilt and will be adhered onto it. So we'll do that at the end. So I just left the paper on right now. So the other side of the paper, we'll pull that off when I get ready to adhere it to the back of the quilt. Okay, so now we need to put this onto our quilt back before we put our binding on. So this one's easy because we know where the center is on the back because there was a center seam up there. And I'm just going to fold this, so give me a second here, in half and put a little pin in there so we know where we need to put this. Get that pin in there. And then I'm going to put the piece that has the Heat and Bond, and it's the narrower side. You can see that the little hems are in about, in the inside of the outer ones. And I'm going to put that against the back of the quilt and match it up with the center seam here. And then we're just going to pin that on. And that is going to be inside the binding, so you won't ever see it. And then we'll have a little hanging sleeve to put on the back of our little quilt. All right, let me put a couple pins in here, and then we'll be ready for the binding. Now the binding I am going to do completely by machine, and that's the way I'm going to teach it today. And I'll probably just do a binding video, each time. I do these because I have to put the binding on, right? So you might as well just watch me do it. So we're going to go ahead. I've got my little sleeve on there, and then of course when I'm all done, I'll then pull this paper off and I'll adhere it down on the back like this, and then it'll be adhered to the back of the quilt. Okay, so we're going to put the binding on by machine. So when I do my binding by machine, I always put it on the back of the quilt, and then I'm going to flip it to the front to sew it down with the zigzag stitch. So I'm going to I've got my little binding. It's all done. Again, mine's 2 1/4, but if you like 2 1/2 inch binding, do 2 1/2 inch binding, whichever works for you. And I'm just going to get my binding ready here. I've got it all made and folded, and this is the raw edge. And I've switched back to a white Pima cotton thread to put the binding on. I think I'm going to sew it down with the monofilament though, because it's red and white striped, and the red's going to show on the white and the white's going to show on the red. So I think I'll do monofilament for my stitching my binding down. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to Q02 on my machine. I'll show it to you again so you remember what we're doing. So this is the Q tab, and I'm doing Q02, which is my piecing stitch. We're going to use that to put it on because we want to use a 1/4 inch seam to put the binding on. Okay, and I'm going to start on the bottom, and we're going to put a little tail out here, and then I'm going to start a little ways from the corner. Now I will link in the description of the video here, and I did in last month's too. I learned to bind with a little device. It was just basically a piece of paper called Bind Aid, and I will link that in my description below this. It was wonderful because it just taught me how to bind. So if you're going to be hand stitching your binding on instead of machine stitching it like me, then you would put it on the front of the quilt. Since I'm going to be doing the machine stitching, I'm putting it on the back. So, but what we're going to do to put it on is the same either way. So, all right. So I am going to do my 1/4 inch seam. Oops, second here. Down to about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the little quilt. So I'm just gonna, and you can mark it if you want. I just kind of guesstimate. I'm usually pretty close. There's another thing on the machine that's really cool if you want to do that, you can do that too, but I usually just kind of guesstimate. Then I'm going to turn my binding up at a 45-degree angle to the corner, and I'm going to match the corner up, and then I'm going to fold it straight down leaving the raw edges together on that first corner. I'm going to get it all lined up again with my 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to tie up, drop my needle and tie off on the edge here. Might need to take one more stitch in, and then we're going to sew up this side. Kind of like, I think I'm going to like that striped binding. I always like striped binding. Okay, and this is just straight stripes. Sometimes the stripes are if you do if you do the stripes in the diagonal, it's cute, but I think they just did these on the, yeah, they just did these on the straight. So, okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to sew up to about 1/4 inch from the edge of the quilt here and stop. And of course, as usual, I have my seam right at my turn, so it never fails. I think it's because we're using fat quarters for the binding. All right, so then we're going to turn this up. So it'll be a little bit bulky in the corner, but you know what? It's going to be fine. And then I'm going to bring this straight down. See, I think I got it a little bit close, but that's okay. All right, then bring it straight down. All your raw edges are still going to line up. Get it lined up here. And then we're going to start on the corner again. Drop my needle, tie it off. And then I'm going to take a few stitches in. There we go. So now we're going to be sewing over that little sleeve too. So it's a little bit thicker here, but it'll be fine. Still doing my 1/4 inch seam. Sure I got everything lined up here. Binding was difficult for me, and I had never really quilted. When I started working at the sewing store, I had never quilted, and all my friends were quilters, so they encouraged me to try it. And I do quilt a little bit traditionally, but most of the time I do stuff with the embroidery machine. But the binding, of course, would be the same with either one. So one of the first things I had to learn to do was bind. And that little bind aid really helped me, and I was able to learn to do continuous binding like this. So I would recommend it, and like I said, I'll link it in the video description. So there's a description right below the video on YouTube, and you can click on, you might have to click the word more just to see the whole thing, but I'll have everything linked, like all the CDs and the transfill and all the different things I'm using. So, okay, so then we're going to turn this one, do the same thing. We're going to turn it straight up at a 45-degree angle, line up my raw edges and bring it straight down. And get it lined up with the raw edges. I'm going to take some of these pins out here so I won't stab myself. That were in my little sleeve. There we go. Okay. And then we're going to start on the corner again, drop the needle, take a stitch in and tie off. Second, I got a bunch of strings here. All right. And then we're going to go down this side. And again, so I'm doing this on the back of the little quilt because I'm going to machine stitch mine down. If you like to hand stitch and you're going to hand stitch yours down, you would put it on the front of the quilt and bring it to the back to do the hand stitching. Depends on which one you like better. But this part is the same either way, whether you put it on the front or you put it on the back. All right, so we're getting down here towards the next end, and this will be the last one, so then I'll show you how to do the little flip at the end and connect them together. So we're going to get down to about 1/4 inch. There we go. Tie off. And then we're going to go around the corner. Do the same thing we did before. Go straight up at a 45-degree angle. Get all of my raw edges even, and then bring it straight down and line it up like that. And I don't have to go too far around the corner. I'm just going to go just a little ways. So that, oops, I got to pull my thread under my foot. Always make sure your thread is also under your foot. I think I've got a little, give me just a second here. I've got just a little, every now and then my thread, it's very dry here now, and my thread likes to do this little flippy thing that it gets a little knot in it, and it's done that. So I think I'm just going to rethread it, see if I can get that out of there, because it likes to do something weird then. Just rethread it here and see if it'll behave itself. There we go. Okay, so I put that back underneath my foot. So it's best to, the other thing is put your thread under your foot before you start. Get everything lined up. We're going to have to probably do our little flip again here. Get everything lined up. Drop your needle into the fabric. Just in the very edge of the fabric, and then start sewing, because then you're less likely to unthread your machine, and also you won't have that eating problem because your needle's already in the fabric. Sometimes with a zigzag plate, you know, because it's a wide hole in your zigzag plate, since the machine will zigzag too, it wants to kind of, you know, pull your fabric down into that hole. So if you aren't dropping your needle, that's why it does that more often. All right, so I'm going to go about to here, and then I'm going to tie off. So I have a little bit of room to work down here at the bottom. Okay, whoops. Now I got pins all over the place here. All right, so now we're ready to do our little flip. Sure my binding is okay. I had a little problem. It was doing something weird with my thread. I think it might have been curled over there. I think it's okay. All right, a little further back. So now we have to do this little flip. So I have to get a couple little things here. And somewhere along, oh, here it is. Gotta find my little pen. I'll need them to make a mark so I can see it. And I've got my little seam gauge. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this end, this is the end we just ended right here, and I'm going to kind of fold this over like this. Then I'm going to bring the part where we started over the top. I'm going to look at that, and since mine was 2 1/4 inches, they need to overlap 2 1/4 inches. If your binding is 2 1/2 inches, it would overlap 2 1/2 inches. So mine is 2 1/4, so I've got my little hem gauge marked at 2 1/4. And I'm going to put my little hem gauge up here, take a pin, and I'm going to, oops, I got to move my little fold down a little bit here. And I'm going to put a pin in the back piece of the binding so that we'll cut that part off. Okay, so I'm going to put it about right there. Should we get it in there? Okay, and then I'm going to measure again to make sure that I've got my 2 1/4 inches, since my binding is 2 1/4. If yours is 2 1/2, it'll be 2 1/2 here. 2 1/4. That looks pretty good. Okay, so then I'm going to take this, I'm just going to fold it on my pin. Like that, if I can get it. There we go. Pull the pin out, and then we'll just trim that off. So now they will overlap. The two pieces of binding will overlap 2 1/4 inches. So if you want to check it again, you can see here's one end here, and here's the other end over here. All right. So now we need to do this little flip deal so that these will lay flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the left-hand side, and I'm going to turn it down at a 45-degree angle like we were going to do the corner. Okay. And then this side, I'm going to take and I'm going to open it up. If I can get it to open here. I'm going to open it up and lay it flat like this on my quilt. Okay, just like that. Then I'm going to continue on this end. I'll make sure you can see it. I'm going to continue on, and I've got it turned this way, and I'm going to continue on as if I was going to go in the same direction. Okay, so I've got it turned down at a 45-degree angle. Just keep going with it then. And I'm going to open it up also, so I'm going to keep going the same direction. Open it up. And then I'm going to lay these corners together like that. And it looks all weird and twisty and everything, but you'll be amazed what happens when we go to lay it flat. This was the hardest part for me to learn. And so that bind aid has this picture on it. And that's how I learned to do it. Because once I looked at the picture was really clear about how you did the little twist at the end. And then I just pin each corner so that they're all lined up. Maybe here. And I'm going to take my little pen, marking pen. This is one of those Frixion pens. I don't always use these, but this one's the one I could get close. And I want to know exactly where that tip is underneath here. So I want to mark that tip. And then I'll just mark this one too so I can see it a little bit better on the other side. Because we're going to sew across there at an angle, 45-degree angle. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my screen and I'm going to put my Q01 stitch up, and that is again in the needle, the center needle position. So I just moved the needle back to the center, and then I'm going to lay this over, and this is a little tricky because they're kind of stiff, but make sure you get it all laid flat like that. And I'm going to go up to my mark, and I'm going to put my needle down right on my mark here. And these small quilts are always a little stiff and a little bit small, so they're kind of hard to get to work on. So I'm just going to take a couple stitches in so that I can get this all laid flat. So don't make your ends too small because it makes it very hard to get them lined up then. I'm going across, straight across to the other mark, and hopefully I got it. There we go. I think we did okay. Now you can draw that whole line in if you want. I usually can eyeball it well enough that I do okay. It's not very far, so. Okay, so let's see how we did. So then when you take all the pins out, with any luck at all, it lays flat like that. Okay, so now we got all this bulky stuff in here, so we got to take that out. So we're going to open this up and take my scissors, and I'm just going to trim that seam out. And then I'm going to open that seam up and just finger press it open like that. And if it's not, see, mine's not very straight. It's okay. It won't show anyway. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. And I like to pin this seam just because I want to make sure that it's flat and everything. So I always pin when I do my final little part of the binding. I just like to pin it here. So we'll put some pins in. And I always pin where the beginning and the end of where I was sewing was, so that I know that it's time to stop, hopefully. Okay, whoops here. This one's trying to get away from me. And there, and then let's put one over here too. And another pin. All right, so I'm going to go back to Q02 for my 1/4 inch piecing stitch. Move the needle back over towards the right, and then we're going to start about where that pin is, tie off, and then we're going to stitch the rest of the binding down. And then we'll be ready to do the zigzagging on the front. Okay. This is going together very nicely. I like that little sleeve. I had it in my head that it would work, but I wasn't sure because I'd never done a sleeve that I didn't like sew down at the top, but the Heat and Bond Ultra works very well. Okay, so I'm gonna try to get this worked in a little bit. I've got just a little bit of fullness here, which seems like I always do. So I'm just gonna try to work it in just a little bit. There we go. I think it's gonna be all right. All right, then we're going to go over to this pin, and we're going to tie up over here. All right. So our binding is on. Doesn't take very long when they're this small, does it? Sometimes it takes me a while to do big quilts. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I am going to take this to my pressing table, my ironing table, and I'm going to press out this binding at a very crisp press out on off the back like this. Now be careful that you do have some vinyls and stuff on the front, but you should be fine. But I'm going to press this out very crisply all the way around, and then we'll come back and we'll do our corners and sew our binding down. So I'm so excited. I love the little stripes. That's really going to be cute. I like the little stripes. All right, so I'll be back in a moment to finish up the binding. Okay, so I've got my binding pressed out crisply, and I have taken some of the little clover clips, some of the little clips, and I have clipped all along each corner, and that's the only clips that I'm going to use. Is I've just kind of clipped the corners in, and I brought the binding around to the sewing line where I sewed it on. So let me show you how to do. I did a couple of the corners while I had the video up, but I'll show you a couple more. So how we're going to do these corners here. So I've just got my clip right up to the line that I sewed it on with, and I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to run my thumb up into that corner. Okay, I'm going to grab a pin here. I'm going to run my thumb up into the corner, get the line all lined up, and then I'm going to bring this down and make a 45-degree angle and bring it down to the other corner. And then we're going to take that pin right at the intersection and pin it down. So then you have that beautiful 45-degree angle. And I'm going to leave the pins in when we go to sew this down so that it's easier to, it won't move on us. So, okay, let me get a couple little strings out of there. We'll do that again. So I'm going to bring this around with my clip to the line that I sewed it down with. I'm going to put my thumb up into the corner and make a nice angle, nice 45-degree angle, and bring it straight down to the line on the other side. Take a pin, slip it into that little corner, right into the corner there, and up and out of the other side. Whoops, I think I'm a little off on this one, so we'll try that one again. It's a little hard to hang on to sometimes, so there we go. That's better. And then I'll get my pin in there, right in that corner, and bring it up. Okay, so there's my 4 corners are all done. I've got them all pinned. I did a couple of them before I brought the video back on. And now we're ready to sew the binding on, and I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. So for this binding, since it's 2 colors, I often, I don't, it's going to show if I use white and it's going to show if I use red. So I'm going to go ahead and use the monofilament. And give me a moment. I think I'm going to have to wind a little bit more thread. I don't know that I have enough. Well, I might have enough to get around. It's going to be close. I may have to stop and wind thread in the middle of it, but we'll give her a whirl here. So I'm going to go back to my monofilament thread for the binding, because I usually use very, very matchy thread to my binding, or I use monofilament depending on the color. And like in the January video, I didn't have a blue quite the right color either, so I went ahead and used monofilament. So we'll use monofilament again. Put the bobbin back in, and again, don't wind too much bobbin thread on the bobbin. So I've got about just a little bit. Hopefully I can get it around. If not, we'll stop and wind bobbin thread. I've done that before in videos, and then I'm going to rethread. Now, the one thing about my monofilament, I will tell you, for some reason, it does like to lay down. I put most of my threads up on the thread stand, but this really likes to lay down in the actual thread spool, where it lays down up here on the top of the machine. So, and I like to put a cap on it that's just a little bit bigger than the spool. Okay, so let's see if it'll thread for me. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Nope, not tonight. Monofilament is kind of stiff, and it doesn't always thread. I usually can get one thread out of it, and then I have to hand thread, and of course it's clear, so it's very easy to thread, Here we go. Got my glasses on so I can see it though. All right. Okay, so now we're going to use a zigzag stitch. And I have one of my zigzag stitches on my standard tab, which is tab number 1 here, that I always use for binding, and it's 1-10. And I have it set up with the settings of 2 millimeters wide, so it's very narrow, and then 1.4 millimeters long. So it's not too long, but it's quite narrow, okay? So I always use those settings, and I just save that in my machine because then I don't have to reset it every time. And let's see, let's start down here at the bottom. And I'm going to bring my binding around to the line that I sewed it on with and get it all lined up. And I'm just going to use my J foot again. This is the foot. I like that little notch in the center of my foot because it really helps me keep things straight. And I'm going to go ahead and tie off. Now this zigzag, what we're going to do is the right zig is going to be on the binding and the left zag is going to be off the binding. Okay, so 1 stitch on the binding, 1 stitch off the binding. So the right's on and the left is off, and we're just going to do, oops, sorry, hit my little flipper here just a minute. This is just the right size that it wants to hit the little flipper on the embroidery unit, so sometimes the embroidery unit will give me a buzz here. All right, so we're just going to put this right up to that line that we sewed it on with. Just hold it up there. You just have to kind of take a couple of fingers and just hold it down. Okay, then I'm going to remove my first clip here. Got some little tails. If there's little tails on your seam allowance, go ahead and trim those off because they kind of get in the way and then things don't lay down nice and flat. So remember, the left side of the zigzag is off the binding, and the right hand is on the binding. So I'm going to pull this pin up a little bit, and I'm going to pull back in the corner with my fingernail just to hold that down on that line where I want it to be. And we're going to sew up into the corner. And I'm going to leave the pin in. Just be careful and sew in slowly. Okay. Then we're going to turn the corner. I also have my pivot feature on, which really helps when you're doing the binding because then you don't have to move things. Now I can see, I'm going to put my foot down, that my notch is way over here to the right and it's too far from the edge of my binding. So I'm going to raise my needle. I'm going to adjust my foot slightly, make sure that my binding is where I want it to be. Yep. And then I'm going to make sure that little notch is back on my binding. Okay, so I think we're good here. Make sure I got my binding where I want it. Okay, and then we're going to sew out of the corner. So you can adjust in that corner. I've learned to do better with my corners. My corners are not always perfect, but they're getting way better because I've practiced a lot of times. I really like the stripe binding. I don't think this was not the same stripe. They have some new fabrics, and I don't have the one that they actually used. It is I think it's not like this one has different sizes of stripes. Oh, you're fine now. I hit my little flipper on my embroidery unit again, sorry. My machine will occasionally stop and make that little noise. Oh, you're fine now. It helps if you take your embroidery unit off. I sew and embroider, you know, within minutes of each other, so I never take mine off, and that's why it does that. Okay. So then I'm going to take this clip out. See how we're doing here. And this is kind of just the wrong width because it like fits almost exactly between my needle and into the slot where you know your embroidery hoops go because it's like just the right size and it wants to slide in there. Okay, we're doing okay, I think. sure I get everything lined up, and I'm kind of pulling back in that corner so that I can line it up on the line, the sewing line. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the corner slowly. You can watch your pin. Okay, and let's see if I can turn this way. There we go. All right, so I kind of undershot that one, so I'm going to take one more stitch. There we go. Kind of undershot it. And that's pretty good. Take this clip off. Make sure that my binding is lined up just right on that line, the sewing line. And then we can come out of the corner. All right. Get this all lined up. The neighbors must be home. I hear lots of loud music. I have a couple of neighbors that must really like to play music loud. And of course now, since I think we're going to have a snowstorm. So this is January 8th, and they say we're supposed to have a really bad snowstorm tonight and into tomorrow. Almost into the next day, Wednesday. This is Monday. So imagine we'll be hearing lots of loud music for the next couple days. People can't get out of their driveways. All right, so I'm just lining everything up. Okay. I think I'm going to move my clip up just a little bit so I can get my binding lined up where I want it to be. So just line it right up on the edge of that line that we sewed on with. Looks good. Take our clip out. And we can go around. I have this feeling we're getting, ouch, ouch. Those little pins are very sharp, by the way. I have a feeling I'm getting pretty close to the end of my bobbin here. We'll see if I can get in and out of this. Yep. I think I'm going to tie off, and I'm going to pause the bobbin, or pause the video for a moment and rewind my bobbin, because when it starts making weirdo sounds like that, my bobbin's out. So you can see it did a weird thing, so we may have to back up a little bit too. All right. So I'm going to wind another bobbin. We're almost done. So it's getting pretty good. We're almost done, but let me wind my bobbin and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got my bobbin rewound, and I sewed just a little bit. I kind of finished that little top corner where we had the little problem. And now I'm ready to finish up and go around this last corner here. Give me a second. I'm going to mark where I started. I try not to sew too many stitches over where I started because you can kind of see the zigzags then. So I'm ready to do this last corner. I put my glasses back on with this monofilament here. So I just wound just very small bobbin, maybe about 1/4 of a bobbin. And I'm just going to continue on down here to this corner, keeping my binding right on the line that we sewed on with. We're going to sew down into the corner. This is the last corner. And take a few stitches in. Then we're going to turn the corner here. And oh my gosh, I did that one pretty well. I'm going to cut this little tail off here to get it out of my way so I won't sew it in. And then I'll take my last little clip out, and then we're going to sew out of this corner. All right, we're just about there. We got to just sew up to here. I'm getting everything lined up there on the sewing line. I think we even did pretty well with our little feet. They look like they line up pretty well. Remember, we had to move that over a little bit, so it looks like they turned out pretty good. Oh my gosh, they're so cute. I love the colors. It's so pretty. All right, so that's where the pin is where I started. So I'm just going to stop right on the pin and tie off. Oh my gosh, look at there. We got around the binding. There is our little mini quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hang it up in the hanger for you so you can see it hanging up. And we are done. Just a moment. I'll turn the video off and get it up in the hanger so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so there's our little mini quilt hung in the little hanger. Isn't that adorable? I just love the colors. It turned out so cute. So thank you so much for joining me for the February mini quilt. And if you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up on YouTube and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. That way you also get notifications when new videos come out. Here's the little January one that we did earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and put that one back in the frame. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day.